Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
So again, welcome everybody to this morning session. Today I am traveling, so it could be that I suffer some loss in the communication line. So to help us in the moderation, we have today Danny from the Smart City Cluster. Thank you, Danny, for that role. Okay.
It's my pleasure.
And I want to welcome also our main speaker for today, Jaime Quesado, that will speak about the collective intelligence as a driver of value in innovation ecosystem. You know, we are an excellent example of collective intelligence, and today is an excellent day to demonstrate it. So please don't hesitate to participate, contribute with your ideas, your references, your proposals on how to improve this exercise of collective intelligence that we are developing since near 1 year now. So thank you for coming. I will let Jaime start with his presentation. Jaime, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonio, for this invitation. It's a pleasure today to speak and to participate. I think that collective intelligence, in fact, is a very interesting matter. And as you said, we are the best example of collective intelligence. Even in these meetings that we have 2 days a week, we are in fact very collective intelligence practice. I will divide my presentation in 2 parts. First, I will present some concepts about collective intelligence, because most of the times we speak about it, and most of the times we don't know what we are speaking about. And then in the second part, I will give some very practical examples about collective intelligence in ecosystems of innovation that are dealing with this kind of matter here in Portugal and in other situations. I think that it would be interesting, and this is an invitation for the moderator, for Danny, that in the third part of the meeting, the people that are participating could give examples of their organizations in terms of collective intelligence. So collective intelligence is something that is very common today in terms of innovation and in terms of competitiveness. This concept was created some years ago in MIT, the School of Engineering and Technology in the United States, in Boston, by Thomas Malone. And the idea was to create and to develop some kind of standards that would help the organizations to better define the way they work in terms of the interactions of their teams. So when we speak about collective intelligence, we speak about the kind of organization of teams and groups that the companies, the universities, the organizations do for that. If we can now, the other slide, please. Okay. So as I said, the main topics for this conversation will be 3. First, I will give some conceptual words about the collective intelligence. Collective intelligence, in fact, it's about how we can advance the field in the way we together are behaving better. Then I will show some examples of the concept, and then we'll try to share, and I think it will be interesting that you could share the way that you see you are doing collective intelligence in your organization. So starting by the concept or examples, I will give some highlights about that. The next slide, please, if it is possible. Okay, so why collective intelligence matters? This pandemic, as we know, and we speak a lot about in these meetings, obliged most of the organizations to redesign their working process and to reposition their objectives and the aims for the future. Because of that, and now we are having a good challenge for the future, it is necessary to develop new standards of collaboration and operational development within the teams. So when we have such a problem, and we seek with the virtual work, with the way that the companies must connect with the markets, with the way that the companies must reconnect within their ecosystems, like clusters, we can say that collective intelligence provides, in fact, the most updating tools to reinforce this capacity of cooperation. And this cooperation, most of the times, must not be decreed and defined by law. It must be constructed day by day in the companies so that the people and the teams that work in the companies, in the clusters, in other ecosystems, must be engaged and must feel that they belong to the process. Another slide, please. Okay. So if we try to translate the concept of collective intelligence into action, we have here some points that I think that are very important. They are very conceptual, but I think they're very important. First of all, it is very, very important to have some very concrete definition of the agenda that the organization have. And I think that you know that one of the most interesting concepts we have now within the organization is the question of the purpose. What is the purpose of the organization? What is the purpose of the people that work in the organization? And this is the point of departure for this concept. Afterwards, it is very important that we have very good data information. And we speak a lot about that here, about the role of data, the role of information, the role of the numbers that we have in our organization to try to have good metrics, to try to have good standards of evaluation. And in fact, this is another important aspect for collective intelligence, to have the right tools in terms of information that provides the teams and the groups with the best decisions that they can make. And finally, one of the other aspects I think it's very important in this collective intelligence agenda is the question of the institutional culture. It's in fact very important that the companies, the organizations, have in fact a very strong institutional and entrepreneurial culture so that they can define very concretely and with very good precision what is the role of each one there. Another concept that I think is very important in which concerns the collective intelligence agenda is the question of the capacity building. This is very important now because most of the people are working, as you know, with the digital tools. Most of them feel most of the times that they don't belong to the day-by-day campus because they are not physically there. And of course, it's very important to try to reposition and to rebuild this question of the capacity building. Can I pass another, please? So, how can we make a connection between collective intelligence and ecosystems? We have different kinds of innovation ecosystems. We have clusters, of course, they are the most standard ones. We have now the digital innovation hubs. I will give afterwards an example of that. We have the science parks. We have the innovation ecosystems connected with universities, lots of them. And one of the points that is very important when it matters about collective intelligence is to define very precisely what is the role of an innovation ecosystem. This is something important now, as we know, because the Commission decided to define 14 industrial ecosystems. They are very concrete. They define a specific agenda for them. And this is a very good example of a way to define very concretely an innovation ecosystem. So when we speak about the role of innovation ecosystem, we must have some points that are very important. First of all, how can we design very concretely the way that this innovation ecosystem works? For example, when we speak about a cluster, it's very important to define the metrics that this cluster will have to see how it can be useful to the companies and to the organizations that belong to them. And we have all at the same time other kinds of belonging that must be evaluated. Another aspect that is very important is the question of the legitimacy of belonging. And we have that example in the clusters. So when an organization belongs to an ecosystem, it's very important that it has that sense of belonging, of participation, of trying to be useful to the ecosystem of a tool. It's important to have a common language. This is very important because most of the times, one of the problems that we have in the ecosystems of innovation is the problem of the standardization of language, the standardization of data. Of Of course, each organization has its role. When we speak about the cluster, we have companies, we have universities, we have centers of innovation, we have other kinds of institutions. Most of them are very different from the others, but of course, it's very important that the standards of common belonging and of common cooperation can be very practical and very useful. And of course, it's very important to have this kind of purpose. With this, we can in fact define that an ecosystem of innovation will be more and more successful if it can concentrate in the way it works, this collective intelligent agenda with the belonging, the purpose, the cooperation, and the very practical benefits for each other and for the whole. Because the success of a cluster is the success of each entity that belongs to it. Another slide, please. So, and what can we say about collective intelligence and clusters? There is some work on that made by some academics and also by some practicals. We have here Albert Pesci, that is one of the most well-known person that have doing a lot of work in clusters. But I think that collective intelligence and clusters have some points that I think are very important. First of all, it's the question that is very, very, very interesting about the response that the clusters can give to the needs that their members have. And I think in which concerns that there has been a very good evolution, because when the clusters theory was created some years ago, we know that it was created by the industrial districts in Italy, and after we have the work of Michael Porter and his team, and afterwards we have lots of examples of success. Catalonia, for instance, it's a very well-known example of success because of the work it has done in the past. And I think from what I see and the experience I have, that during the last years, they have a reinforcement and a strengthening of the belonging area of the organizations in the ecosystem that are the clusters. Now, most of the companies and of the entities that belong to the clusters feel that, in fact, they have something to say in the participation they have in the clusters. And most of them, and I see from the inquiries I have read in their different countries, feel that they benefit from the fact of belonging to a cluster in terms of their know-how, in terms of their capacity to be more competent in the markets and other things. And this is, I think, one very good example of collective intelligence in the clusters, when the members that belong to the clusters feel that, in fact, they are very positive for that. Another aspect I think it's very important has to see with the question as for the networks. The collective intelligence is about networks, because when we speak about cooperation, we speak about the capacity to build and to sustain networks. And we know that this is very difficult because now, and this pandemic took this question to the field, most of the networks have a very dynamic, and most of the times it's very difficult to sustain them because there are another expectations, another kind of invitations. And when we speak about innovation networks, when we speak about innovation cooperation, most of the times it's very difficult to maintain them. It's necessary to reinvent, to create new kinds of opportunities, to try to develop a new agenda. And I think collective intelligence is also about that. The capacity that a cluster has to reinvent itself, not to be static in the time, and to readapt to the circumstances and the conditions that we have. Another slide, please. We speak also about collective intelligence and innovation. And I think that collective intelligence is also a lot about innovation. I will say 2 or 3 things that I think are very important. First of all, one aspect I think it's important is the question of learning. Clusters are mostly and also very, very good examples of learning platforms. Because one of the things that I think I'm more interested in clusters is the way that the companies, the universities, and other members that belong to the clusters share ideas, share experience, try to develop good practice, and try to give their good example to the good example of the cluster. And I think that this learning capability, this learning demonstration is something very interesting for the development of clusters. Another thing I think it's very important has to see with the business innovation agenda. I think that clusters are also a very good example of the interaction that we have between startups, between small and medium enterprise, some of the times between big companies and multinationals. And within these kind of companies and the universities and centers of competence, we have lots of good examples of a business innovation cycle that is a success to the cluster and, of course, to the companies that belong to them. This is also another example of collective intelligence. And finally, I think that one aspect that I think is very important is this multidisciplinary question, the way that we can share in a cluster different points of view. We have some clusters, especially the ones that are connected with smart cities, with the creative industries and others, where we can different kinds of activities. We have more technical activities, we have more creative activities, we have more sustainable activities, and it's very interesting how the sharing of these different views can have good interesting for the cluster success. Another slide, please. So I'm going to present here 4 or 5 examples of ecosystems and very practical situations where we can say that in fact the collective intelligence is going on. One aspect that I think is very important is the question of smart regions. We have spoken a lot about that in the other meetings. As you know, smart regions is a concept that is developing a lot. We have in the past and even now the question of smart cities, but the question of smart regions, as in the last meeting it was said by one of the presenters, it's very more difficult and more complex than the question of smart cities. Smart regions integrate communities of knowledge and innovation in order to develop, in fact, a common threshold of value and trying to mobilize the policymakers, the companies, universities, and centers of competence to a collaborative agenda that, in the end, can give to the region a new strategy to the future. We have lots of examples of digital innovation apps and other ecosystems that are trying to concentrate this smart region agenda. For example, in Portugal, from something that I explored, there is a very good project that is now in evaluation that is connected with an experience in the interior, northern and southern region. It involves some polytechnicals, some clusters, some companies, some municipalities, and the idea, in fact, it's trying to develop a collective agenda for this region, trying to say that, for instance, the new agendas of the European Commission and the programs that it is going to be settled, the ECO, the Green Deal, and the digital are going there. So one very good example of collective intelligence is, in fact, the question of the smart regions. Collective intelligence is, in fact, one question very, very important for the success of smart regions. Another slide, please. Okay. Another example I have here, it is connected with the question of health ecosystems. We have, of course, lots of experience on that. In Portugal, we have a very good example that is the cluster of health. That is a very good experience in terms of cooperation between universities, centers of competence that we have, especially in Porto, Coimbra, and Lisbon, and some companies, 2 or 3 big companies and other startups that are involved on that. And of course, being health one of the most updating and important areas because of the pandemic, of the problems that it arises, it's very, very important to try in the health ecosystem to develop new ways of collective intelligence, especially in terms of, for example, 3 examples I put here. The question of the data that is extremely important now. And it is very important that the way that the data is organized, is coordinated, can be shared by all the stakeholders that belong to this cluster and to this system. Some very practical problems like the mental health. As you know, mental health now is becoming a very complicated problem with the pandemic. And it's important that a cluster in this area and the members of the cluster can provide new kinds of solutions to try to solve this problem. And finally, the one aspect that I think is very, very important That is the question that the collective intelligence in this case must be concentrated in the patient, in the person. That is the right tool for that. I have here some kinds of examples about what can be done in that, but the presentation will be shared. I will not present it, but the message is very clear. If there is an area where collective intelligence is becoming more and more important, it's in fact in the ecosystem of health. And we have some good examples of clusters, like in Portugal and in other countries, where we can be this point. Another slide, please. Another example I put here, it's about what's going on special in the ICT area, but also in other areas. That is the question of the open hubs, the open ecosystems, the open platforms. As we know, especially in the last years, most of the companies and most of the organizations try to develop the new kinds of internal organization of the people. So instead of the cabinets and the more closed spaces, now we have in most of the organizations, either public or private, this kind of open hubs. This is also about collective intelligence because special have two aspects that I think that are very important. One is the question of participation. And in fact, it's better for the company and for the cluster and for other ecosystems when we develop the culture of participation, a culture of sharing, and a culture of belonging. And the way that these spaces are organized and are distributed most of the times is very, very interesting for that. We are going to have now in the future a very good challenge in which concerns the hybrid work. Most of the organizations now and in the future, I think, will try to invest and to develop this new kind of work where people most of the days are in the work, but other days are at home. And the way this can develop new kinds of participation, of sharing, and value creation in the organization is very important. I think that in this area, clusters can be also a very good example because they can also try to develop new standards of cooperation with their ecosystem that can be useful for the companies that belong to them on that. Another aspect that I think is very important on this area, it's about accountability and metrics. Because it's very important that, in fact, instead of this new kind of organization of the space and the participation in the companies, that we don't lose the question of the accountability, the question of the legitimacy, the question of the evaluation, and the evaluation. It's very important that people that belong to an organization, even if they work at home on a digital way, they must understand that, in fact, they can have a process in the future. Another slide, please. Okay. And finally, the last example that I put here that is connected with the Green Deal. We have spoken a lot about that during the last sessions. We know that now with the Green Deal, we have very new examples of digital innovation hubs. Even the clusters and science parks are becoming more and more sustainable, more connected with area. And I think that this agenda of the sustainability will be, in fact, very, very important for the collective intelligence agenda. I have here a quote from a very well-known professor from the University of Texas. And in fact, what he says is that this question of collective intelligence will be, in fact, very, very critical for a new reposition and a new reconcept of the environment question. So it's very important that when we speak about some eco and digital trends like the new kind of agriculture, the new kind of mobility and transports that we are dealing with, everything that is connected with the environmental techniques and sensors, the question of the new way the citizens feel and behave in terms of science and eco and the sustainable questions. All these are questions that belong to the Green Deal, as you know. This is a new kind of agenda that will drive a very, very, very strong and progressive transformation in our economy and society. And I think that collective intelligence will have here a very good example. All the clusters and all the ecosystems that are capable of belonging to this new agenda with more success, they will have, of course, all the conditions to be more practical in the future and to be more useful to the other science. Another slide, please. So this is the last slide. What else needs to be done to advance the field of collective intelligence? The ecosystems of innovation are in fact the best example that we have about collaborative apps that can give to the companies, to the universities, to the people that belong to the ecosystem a sense of purpose to the future. And I think that with the new agenda that we are going to have in the European Commission, either the Green Deal, either the programs that are being launched in the countries in terms of reconstruction and resilience, either in the new funds that will come in the next years, this in fact will be very, very important in terms of the future that we are going to have. So collective intelligence, more than a theoretical agenda, is something that must be very, very practical by all the actors that belong to a cluster and to an ecosystem. And the more the collective intelligence the cluster has, the more successful it will be. So this was my presentation. I'm able for any question, and I think it will be interesting to have some comments by the colleagues about what they think of collective intelligence in their organization. Thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Antonio.
Okay, so it seems that the connection is working from the train, but I will let, I think it's better if Danny moderate the debate. I am sure it will be very, very interesting. So I just want to encourage you to participate. Danny, the floor is yours for moderation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Antonio, and thank you very much, Jaime, for this great presentation. Of course, we want to hear from the participants because there is a lot of different examples from clusters, and we have set use for different types of collective intelligence in our respective clusters. Jaime, I would like to ask you one question, and then we can ask the rest of the participants to contribute. You were talking about trustworthiness and in some sense credibility when you are considering the different sources from collective intelligence inputs, and you were specifically talking about formal validation. Do you have anything about non-formal validation? Because ultimately we pay attention to all types of inputs. Some of them don't need to be formal for them to be trustworthy for us. And I wanted to know if you had some research or some insight on this topic.
Well, in fact, most of the information, Danny, that we have on this is more formal, and that I told you, we have special two entities that have done a lot of work on this. One is MIT, as I told you, and the other is also a think tank in London that has done over that. But I think that now we can see, especially with this pandemic, that in most cases, especially in some clusters and in science parks, we are having new kinds of informal ways of trying to develop and measure collective intelligence, especially when they don't have the capacity internally to evaluate in a more formal way. But in fact, I don't have a lot of information about this more informal way, but I think that in fact is becoming more and more important in the future. But I think it's a very good point. I will try to have more information on that. In fact, what is more disposable for everyone is the formal way.
The reason why I'm asking this is because in the smart city environment, we have, for example, the official information sources. You can say the National Institute for Statistics, for example, or Eurostat. But you also have, for example, the data from the mobile phone operators. Or you have, for example, the data from, we have in the cluster, we have the largest portal of real estate where people put the ads of when they want to sell their apartment, and it has millions and millions and millions of apartments in the database.
Yes.
That information is non-official, but it is very useful because it provides some type of value that is actually that you can exploit, but
Yes.
it doesn't account for officiality. But if the cities, for example, in the case of a smart city, tap into that value, they can get also a lot of benefit.
I agree with you. In fact, it's very important that complementary to the formal data and the formal mechanisms that the organizations have, and the smart city is a very good example. I think it's a very good example. We can have access to our informal data. The problem, I think, is that we can have a very good lecture and a very good evaluation on this informal data in order that it cannot disturb the formal information. And I think collective intelligence is also a way to try to make a commitment between this formal and informal data, so that we can, with intelligence, and all this is about intelligence, a cluster is an intelligence hub, of course, in order to have success.
That's great. I think we have some comments in the chat from attendants. Alberto has written something, and I think it would be valuable to hear because he's a very experienced person in this field, and I'm sure he has a lot to offer. Alberto, would you like to contribute?
Okay, thank you very much. I was prepared because I feel to intervene. First of all, thanks, Jaime, for this very insightful presentation. I think this is a topic of paramount importance for cluster, but also not only for cluster, but also for the current economic scenario. In fact, data and knowledge are probably the most important source of hidden gold of organization today, and a lot of the new business model are based on using this data through new technologies that we have now, like artificial intelligence and others. So, and we see applied it in traditional sector, like for instance, fashion industry. We recently undertake a strategic update in Catalonia, and we see that really the new startups, the new business that are created, are all based on models that exploit this big data, and so this is I think is very linked to collective intelligence. I think that this is a topic, of course, that will deserve more attention from cluster, and deserve probably the need of more discussion in these morning meetings, because I think that there are other concepts that are really linked to this, but are not exactly the same. And you know very well, Jaime, the concept of knowledge management. So the fact
Yes.
how we really make this collective intelligence work and share, because this is the effect of sharing the knowledge is exponential to its usefulness. And here also there is another concept that I know that is taken into account in cluster and also from the Commission, that is the concept of strategic foresight. So try to go a bit more beyond what we can observe now, and try to make some scenarios. And the last point I would like also to, well, last 2 points very quickly that I would like to touch, very linked to your presentation. I think that always we talk a lot about organization, but at the end, knowledge is always in people, and I am not saying I'm not saying information, I'm not saying data, I say knowledge. Knowledge means how to interpret data. And this is, I think, is something that is very important for cluster organization, because at the end, behind the cluster organization, there are people. So the people that and in this sense, I think it is also very important to see what are not only the knowledge that is explicit and the data that we can collect, but also what is in people's minds, that is called the tacit knowledge. And this would be more and more important in the future well, respond to all the challenges we will have. And so I think I totally agree on your intervention. Just don't forget this issue. And the very last point, I think you touch also the fact that the capacity of change that is linked to, and the cluster could be an engine for innovation, for make it innovate. In fact, in Catalonia, we had carried out a very quick study a couple of years ago regarding how the cluster organization has evolved over the time, and we see that in the last decade of the original 30 cluster organization we had, that only less than 30% remain the same over this. So that either some initiative are disappear, either some other have been integrated or merged in another cluster initiative. So this is something that I think is good. It's good. If I always say that if we had the same cluster portfolio now that 20 years ago, it would be a disaster. So this is, and what make it change, the engine for change, I think it's really what you refer to, knowledge and collective intelligence. So okay. It's a topic that I think is very important, and I hope we will have occasion to discuss it further in the future. Thank you.
Alberto, only to say that I agree entirely with you. In fact, this collective intelligence is so broader in terms of concept, and you know, even the concept of shared value, that is a concept that you have doing a lot in the last years. It was a Michael Porter, Michael Kramer concept, is also about collective intelligence, because when we speak about creating value and sharing it in the community, we must develop a collective intelligence in the community so that people must be concentrated on that. I completely agree with you, and thank you very much for your topics.
That's great. We are open to receive contributions from the participants in the session today. So if anybody would like to ask, it's a good time to open your mic and take the floor. Clodagh, would you like to ask your question out loud for us to hear, or if that's possible? And if not, maybe we can read it from the text. Jaime, do we know where any clusters include collective intelligence as a measure of the annual performance and as a measured value in cluster success? This is a very interesting topic because it's connected with how we measure.
Yes, this is a very good question, and it has to see with the way that the clusters and the companies are evolving in the way they measure their performance. As we know, we have the most standards economic and social metrics that belong to the economic side, but now we have special in the environment area, and it has to see with the happiness question, the sustainable question. We have more and more indicators and metrics that are being used in the future in the companies. I think that this collective intelligence question, from what I know, has not still very, very practical and concrete metrics to that. But I know that the MIT and Professor Thomas Malone, that as I told before, are developing a lot of work on this area, are developing the new metrics, and I think that this year they intend to launch something about that. As far as I know, I will also let you know about that. But I think that this can be very interesting if they find very practical metrics that can develop and evaluate and compare and foresight the performance that a cluster or any other ecosystem has in terms of collective intelligence. And as Professor Thomas Malone said in a presentation that I saw 2 years ago in London, I was there and I saw this presentation. It's very important because if we don't have this kind of metric in the cluster, in which concerns collective intelligence, most of the times they don't have the necessary tools to be more and more ambitious in terms of their agenda. So we need to create and truly develop more and more metrics that, more than making a static evaluation of the performance of the cluster, must give the cluster and their members, the institutions that belong to it, need to be better, to be more competent, to be more ambitious, and to be more insightful for their organization. So I think that this is something that we are going to have in the future and if I have some information on that in the next weeks or something like that, I will tell you about that.
Certainly, this is for us is an open topic, which means that we can discuss it really at any point in time. Actually, it's like a live topic. While we wait for any other questions or contributions, or if anyone wants to take a floor, I have more questions, and one of them is also regarded with also this metric or a measure of the actual value proposition. And it has to do with Heisenberg's principle that when you actually observe something, you are interfering with it and changing it. And I want to play a little bit devil's advocate here. So between the good and the bad side, how actually setting up metrics for your cluster is making people focus more on the metric than on the actual value of the work, and how good or bad can that be for the organization, no? Like the finger and the moon, or something like that. This is a topic that is really interesting because it goes right to the core of your value proposition. What can you tell us about that, Jaime?
Yes, I entirely agree with you. One of the main questions that we are going to have in the future in the clusters and in other ecosystems is, as you were telling very well, the question of the evaluation of the effective value proposition that it has for its members. When we speak about the cluster, and this was one of the central topics when Michael Porter and his team created it some years ago, we speak about a question of the pros and cons. That is to say, when a company decides to belong to a cluster, it has some reasons to do that. First of all, because it see that it can have a very good value that is concerned with the experience that it can have with other companies and other entities that belong to the cluster. The second one has to see with the question of belonging and participating and sharing and giving his contribution to the collective good and to the collective purpose of the cluster. And another is also the question of trying to use and to benefit from the cluster in their own internal proposition of value and everything that is connected with that. Special the return on sales and return on that. So it's very important that, in fact, when we have this commitment between the individual and the collective, the company that belongs to the cluster and the cluster as a collective entity, we can try to see which kind of value we can measure time by time. And I think this is one of the challenges that we are going to have in the future. When Claude spoke about the question of the metrics of collective intelligence, we are speaking about that. That is to say, in the future, more and more the return that the entities have in the associations and ecosystems that belong to must be very practical and must be very concrete. And this question of value, as you say, Danny, must be very concrete. And for that, it's necessary that we implement in the clusters, and this is very useful, data basis and the data information that can in fact give that. So I think this is going to be in the future one of the most challenging items, is the way that the clusters and other ecosystems can implement in their organization more and more effective data performance basis that in fact can give to the company individually and to the cluster collectively the way that they have a positive return on this question of the contract that we are doing. Because when a company belongs to a cluster, it's a kind of contract that it is doing. It says that it wants to belong to a community, and this belonging to the community will be useful to it and will be useful to the past. And I think that the clusters, from what I see, are the best examples of ecosystems that can develop this kind of value metric in the future, because they are very dynamic. They are having a very good performance in terms of the programs that we are having in Europe and in other areas of the world, and they more and more will be the effective representations of the industrial ecosystems.
Okay, good. Now, while we wait for other questions or inputs or participations from the attendants today, I would like to follow up that comment with another question that is related to this, and that is when you can look to the cluster like inwards, which is the members and the relationships among the members, and also outwards, which is the connection with the cluster, the parts of the value chain that are outside the cluster, and society in general, the economic tissue, and the public administration. This presents also different metrics to be able to measure, because some would be interested in pure return on investment for the bottom line euros at the end of the day, but others maybe will be focused on public image or a sense of growing, and other will be focused on jobs creation. How many more people are employed because of the work carried out together by the members of the cluster. How do you link this to the collective intelligence patterns and the efforts to provide value in each one of these points?
Well, Danny, I think this is a very, very, very interesting and very important point. One of the things that this pandemic took was the necessity to redefine the value chains of the ecosystem, and we speak a lot about that in the sessions we are going to have here. And this makes a connection between open innovation and collective intelligence. Okay, the problem is the following: the clusters and the companies that belong to the clusters will have to redefine most of the ways they interact with the suppliers, with the internal organization, with the customers, and with the competitors. This is the basis of the theory of Michael Porter. So this must be adaptive. We have lots of problems during this pandemic with the supply chain, as you know. The problem with the blocks that raw materials came from China and from other areas. Lots of sectors like textiles and others that have lots of problems in terms of having the raw materials to produce their products. And of course, when we have a cluster, one of the agendas of the cluster is to provide common solutions for the solving of the problems of their members. One of the best examples we have here in Portugal about clusters is the cluster of shoes. It has more or less 30 years, and it has been considered during lots of times one of the best examples for OECD and for other institutions. What happened with the shoes in Portugal? We have lots of small companies. Most of them don't have capacity to be effective good buyers in terms of raw materials. Others have lots of problems in terms of the access they had to the market. And they decided some years ago to create a very strong association, that now it's a cluster, to invest a lot in a central, in a technological center that decided, in fact, to do a lot of work in terms of innovation and R&D. And in fact, what we assisted when this cluster was created some years ago was to a collective intelligence agenda that gave to these small companies the possibility to be more effective companies. So the cluster organization in itself is a good example of collective intelligence, because it provides to the members that belong to the cluster a sense of belonging, and especially, as you said before, a sense of trust in the process, because the worst thing that we can have when we speak about a community, and the cluster is also and especially a community, is the question of trust and the question of belonging. But of course, collective intelligence is also about adaptation. And we see that with this pandemic, most of the standards that were traditional in the way that clusters work are not the same that they were in the past. The efficiency that the suppliers are able to provide the raw materials, the behavior of the markets and of the customers that will be more and more difficult, more and more demanding, more and more complicated, will implicate that the clusters have the capacity to be more effective. And I think, as you say, and I agree completely with you, a collective intelligence will be the best tool to define the best way that the clusters and the companies that belong to the clusters can be successful in the redefinition of the value chain. This will be very critical to the success of most companies. If they don't have this capacity of permanent adaptation, permanent lecture of the market, and perfect sharing of common solutions, I think most of them will have very, very complicated problems to be successful in the future. And this is also about collective intelligence, I think.
Well, actually, when you think about it, collective intelligence is what turns a collection of members going out about their own stuff into actually a community with relationships and with combination of inputs and outputs that they end up creating value out of it, which is some sort of complex effort and way of working, but with a very thin rules and lines of work. Also, I would like to speak for a couple of minutes about the different incentives that the members of a cluster and the cluster itself has for doing what they do, and not incentives in the way of public grants or public support or financial support, but really more in the sense of motivation.
Yes.
This also connects with what we mentioned about measuring the performance. Maybe we're going backwards to the beginning on what is the motivation or the reasons actually for doing what they do. And I would like to know what is your take on the analysis of these incentives for the participants?
Yes, I think that the participants that belong to a cluster and to a community in general have two kinds of incentives. First of all, of course, the grants, the financial incentives, and I think that I don't have any doubt that most of the time some companies and some entities want to belong to a community like a cluster, because they know that with that they will have access to information and incentives that individually they should have. But this is the concept of community and of a cluster. It's trying to aggregate, to consolidate, and to give a better use to the individual. But I think that now, with the shared value agenda, with the social responsibility agenda and other kinds of agendas, most of the companies and most of the entities that belong to a cluster have new kinds of interests and new kinds of objectives. Let's see the digital and the Green Deal. These are very, 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 very critical aspects for the future. For example, yesterday I was in a seminar where the person that is very specialized in eco and sustainability questions told one very practical thing. In the future, most of the banks and the financial entities will have to be responsible within the national banks and the European Central Bank for lots of metrics concerned with eco and sustainability. And for that, they will need to have very concrete ideas about that. So it will be very critical in the future for a small company and for a startup or another company to have this kind of metrics in their own organization, because if it has not, most of the times the access to the financing of the bank will be very difficult. That is to say, the banks, if they don't feel that the company that is asking for a loan has not a very complete agenda on that, things will be very complicated. A cluster can be a very good answer on that, because a cluster can implement something on this kind of metrics in eco and sustainability. And of course, this can be very useful for the members. If a cluster have a proposal on this area, it can in fact be very practical for the future of the company. This is one example. And this is a very practical example, because from what I heard yesterday, in fact, the loans and the financing questions will be more difficult in the future. And without that, most of the games cannot survive. Another example I think is very important is in which concerns the digital. Okay, we are going to have the artificial intelligence, the IoT, everything that is connected with the new IT methods. But in terms of, for instance, of the artificial intelligence, most companies are not still prepared for this new challenge that is the artificial intelligence. The way that in the campus they are going to deal with the machines, and collective intelligence is also about that. How in the future humans and machines will interact, but I didn't speak about that because I think it was not interesting for this today. But clusters must also be very important on that. If artificial intelligence will be very critical for the success of most campuses in the future, in the way they can benefit from the use of robots or other kinds of machines in their internal organization, clusters can also develop a common agenda on this question and try to provide, according to the sectors we are speaking about. Textiles is different from the automotive, health is different from ITC, but in fact to try to develop some common standards that can be in fact very useful for the campus. So I think that this cluster agenda will adapt itself to the needs that we are going to have in the future. And this is very important, because if the companies feel that the cluster as a platform that aggregates and consolidates this kind of questions, has very good proposals for them, this question of trust that we spoke about will be better and better.
Well, I think that was fantastic, because the value is of this morning sessions, I really have to say, is waiting for you behind every corner unexpectedly, and sometimes there are little gems that we discover here, and I think it was a very seminal session for us, because this is really the deep in the groundwork that we can debate for many times, and it applies to almost any morning session that we are going to be conducting in the future. It's nearly time to close. I see Alberto has opened his mic. Would you like to make any final remarks, Alberto?
Well, now we are closing. So that just one thing that I believe that you raised the issue of incentives. I think that we don't have to forget that the cluster at the end are an ecosystem in which we have a lot also of competitors. So I don't want sometimes that we have this idea that everybody is collaborating in all, and I think it's I don't say that this is not is bad, but the example that Jaime gave about these big challenges like climate change, I think are the ones that could make competitors and company fine-tune for a common goal. But still in the day-to-day, I think that it's the fact of collective intelligence and sharing knowledge within cluster still have a lot of issue like the prisoner dilemma, no? With what it's I want to share with my competitor or not. But it's something that is too long maybe to continue. Let's continue the discussion. I'm sure in further sessions. Thank you very much, Jaime, again, and Danny, for the very good moderation.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Danny. You have done a wonderful job as moderator. I think that we will repeat it not so far from now. And thank you very much, Jaime, for all the contribution. I think it has been a full of inspiration for today, and I am sure that we will review the video and your presentation carefully. Thank you also, Alberto. I think, as you said, that we need to go deeper in that, and you could be an excellent speaker to do that. So
Yes,
start
no doubt.
thinking about it. Okay. And so we are closing for today. Have a very, very wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.